The mailbox stuck before it gave. Lucia had to yank it with both hands, bare knuckles grazing the rusted lip, the cold metal biting like a reminder that nothing gave easily anymore. Inside, the usual paper grief, a red-stamped bill, a flyer promising limited-time pizza, a coupon for a gym she'd never afford. And then a thing that did not belong to her life at all, an ivory rectangle bound in satin, smug in its own weight, heavy as a dare. She didn't need to open it to know. Her body knew. The ribbon slid free with a hiss, and the card breathed gold. Together with their families, Adrien and Rebecca invite you. She read it twice because her brain refused to accept that vowels could rearrange time. Adrien, the man who used to leave the cereal box open and call it ventilation. The man who had sworn Rebecca was just a coworker with good taste in playlists. Now, marrying her at Bella Vista Hall, the venue Lucia had circled with a pink highlighter at 19 and whispered to her pillow like a spell. The letters on the card had edges. They cut. She stepped back into the stairwell because sitting down would be surrender. The stairwell smelled like cabbage and the neighbor's lemon detergent. A bulb flickered defiantly overhead, and the concrete wall pressed cool against her spine. She let out a sound she wouldn't call a laugh and wouldn't call a sob. Something in between, too thin to hold anything. Outside, the afternoon had smeared itself across the city, heat on the sidewalks, buses exhaling, distant horns like arguments she didn't want to know. She crossed the street to the low brick wall in front of her building and sat as if her knees weren't trustworthy. A boy on a scooter zipped past. Two women argued cheerfully about cilantro. Lucia stared at the card and then at her reflection in the window. Brown eyes, hair that could never decide what to do, mouth set in that stub. Born line she'd been born with. A wedding? She said to no one. A wedding. The word felt ridiculous in her mouth, like a joke at a funeral. 3 months. That was all it had taken to turn we into confetti in someone else's forever. 3 months since the tired speech about needing to find myself that had sounded suspiciously like, I found someone else. 3 months since his toothbrush stopped sharing space with hers in the ceramic cup shaped like a cat. And now, a televised happy ending in a hall with chandeliers like falling constellations. Humiliation burned clean. It scoured through her chest and left a hard, bright space. She stood, the card creaking in her hand, and walked upstairs with purpose she manufactured on the spot. Inside her apartment, she set the invitation on the kitchen table, a scarred orphan of a table that had outlived 3 landlords, and looked at it the way you look at a mosquito you have every intention of ending. You think you can cast me as the sad anecdote, she said, as if the card could be addressed? Fine, I'll bring a date who makes your hired violinists miss a note. It was a ridiculous plan. That was the point. A beautiful, reckless, unnecessary piece of theater to take back some ground in a war no one else had noticed. Tomorrow she would figure out the logistics. Tonight, she would armor herself in the small comforts left to her. A dented box of chocolates, a blanket with pilled edges, a rom-com she could recite in her sleep. She cued the movie, but the plot slid off her like rain off wax paper. Even the joke sounded dubbed from another planet. She laughed anyway, stubbornly. Tears kept politely at the door, and when the credits rolled, the sugar in her blood fizzed into a terrible clarity. She didn't need a soulmate. She needed a sightline, someone tall enough to block the pity, interesting enough to make whispers change direction, handsome enough that Rebecca would feel the faint, unholy wobble of doubt. She could not afford a professional escort. She refused to ask any of her friends. They were too real, too close, too aware of the truth. She needed a stranger who happened to look like a choice. The next morning, she woke to her alarm and a headache. A bruise-colored sky sat on the horizon, threatening rain and changing its mind. Lucia showered with the precision of an athlete, made coffee like it was medicine, and opened her laptop to the job listings she checked daily. Receptionist, part-time clerk, 2 interviews next week that might become nothing. The word restructuring haunted her inbox like a ghost that never left. She closed the laptop on it. She cleaned the sink because motion was easier than thought. She put on the blue dress that made her feel like she had a plan, and left the building before her doubts could put shoes on. The city was a slow pulse under her feet. She walked, past the bargain store where the mannequins slouched, past the florist where lilies tried to out-fragrance the exhaust, past a window display of wedding cakes stacked like white-of-egg architecture. Lucia stopped there, watching a woman inside pipe buttercream into obedient swirls. She imagined Bella Vista's cake towering like a well-behaved cloud, imagined Rebecca posing beside it, chin at that angle people learn from magazines. Then she kept walking, because there are days when you refuse to be the person who stares into other people's glass. She turned down a street she didn't usually take. A fancy restaurant sat there like a ship that had beached itself in the wrong neighborhood, linen napkins, polished brass, waiters who moved like dancers because they could, out. Side on the cool side of the brick facade, a man sat with his back against the wall. His feet were bare. The jacket he wore had lost a long battle with weather and time. Threads dangled at the cuff like defeated flags. He wasn't looking at the door for charity or scanning faces for sympathy. He was watching the world as if it were an aquarium, and he'd been assigned to note the habits of the fish. Lucia almost kept walking. Then something in the way his shoulders rested, composed, not collapsed, made her slow. His beard needed the kind of attention barbers give on slow mornings. His hair had declared independence. But his eyes, when they met hers, were startlingly alive. Blue, yes, but not the postcard blue that begged to be praised. This was a working blue, thoughtful, a color that had seen things and decided not to be impressed anymore. "You okay?" she asked, because everything inside her leapt at the wrong moments, and because sometimes politeness is a form of rebellion. "Depends on your definition," he said, voice a little rough, a little amused, as if he'd been speaking only with his own head for days and had to reacclimate to the idea of other people. "You've got no shoes," she said, because observation was safer than concern. He glanced at his feet as if they were surprising new acquaintances. "They left me for someone with better arches." A laugh collided with her. It felt unwise. "Do you have a name, or are we doing the mysterious thing?" He considered, and it was a real consideration, not a flourish. "Dylan." "Lucia," she offered, because symmetry is soothing. He nodded once. The nod said, "I heard you, and also I'm not going to use it carelessly." The idea rose from somewhere reckless, the part of her that had written back to humiliation with a vow. "Dylan," she said, "how do you feel about weddings?" "I disapprove of the cages but admire the cake," he said. "Why?" "I have one on Saturday. I need a date." She checked his face for mockery, for the wince of a man being forced into a joke at his expense. He gave her nothing but attention, the kind that feels like a clean room. "Define need," he said. She swallowed the correct answer and gave the active one. "I've been invited to my ex's wedding. I intend to look unbothered. I want to walk in with someone who makes a room forget why it's looking at me." "A strategic appearance," he said, tasting the words. "You'll get a shower," she said. "Real food, a suit that isn't perfect but will pretend well. You only have to stand near me and look interested." "You're hiring me to be present," he said, not unkindly. "That's rarer than people think." She shrugged, and pride glinted in the gesture because pride was the cloth she wrapped fragile things in. Payment includes dinner and a bed to sleep in that is not the sidewalk. One night, 0 strings. You get to say no. He studied her. The assessment wasn't a stripe-by-stripe gaze. It was an engineering survey. Where do the beams go? Can this roof bear weight? "What's the risk?" he asked, and he was asking for both of them. "You might have to dance," she said, because humor was easier to carry than fear. "And I might blush if someone asks how we met." He smiled, slow, entire, shocking in its gentleness. It rearranged his face into someone you'd let babysit your plants and your mother. "There are worse jobs," he said. "What's the catch?" "The rule," she said, surprising herself by phrasing it that way. "One rule. You act like you like me. You don't lie to anyone in a way that hurts me, and when it's over you leave." "That's 3 rules," he said, and the smile didn't leave. It just drifted to the side like a boat repositioning. "Math was never my thing." He pushed his palms on the brick and stood. He was taller than she'd expected, not towering, possible, shoulders that belonged in better fabric. He looked down at his bare feet, wiggled his toes as if reminding himself they were attached, and then looked back at her. "One rule from me," he said, "no questions about my past." She opened her mouth, closed it. The instinct to pry was bright, the curiosity to script him into a neat narrative she could use, but a strange respect lifted its head inside her, the recognition of a boundary not asked for theatrically, but placed down like a necessary tool. "No questions," she repeated. The words felt both narrow and clean. They walked together because that was the only way to test a decision. Past a bakery where the air itself gained weight, past a mother scolding a child gently in a language Lucia didn't know, past a lamp store full of small constellations. He didn't ask her what color the dress would be, or whether her ex was a villain, or why her hands were shaking just enough to notice. He watched the cracks in the concrete as if they were maps, and she watched his posture, nothing of collapse in it, a quiet line of spine and chin she had not seen in the men who asked for change outside her subway station. Boardroom posture, her brain whispered, unhelpful. At her building, he paused, as if waiting for permission to cross some invisible threshold. She held the door, and he stepped through without performing gratitude. In the dim hallway, he moved slowly, not because he was unsure, but because this was someone else's space and slowness is a kind of respect. The lemon detergent ghosted here too. Her door stuck the way it always stuck. She hip-checked it, and it yielded. Her apartment was not much. 2 rooms that believed in each other, a kitchenette brave enough to be called a kitchen, walls painted the pale yellow her great-aunt had insisted invites sun. A cat-shaped salt shaker guarded the stove. The couch had one good angle for napping and several for regret. Dylan looked around and did not annotate anything with his face. Coffee? She said, because this is how you tell someone you are not a trap. I run on it, he said, and that could have sounded like a line, but didn't. She spooned grounds with the concentration usually reserved for surgery, listened to the water begin its soft fury, found 2 clean mugs at the back of a cabinet where a jar of paprika had gone to die. When she turned, he was at the table, jacket folded with care over the back of a chair that wobbled if you looked at it wrong. He wrapped his hands around the mug she offered as if heat were a conversation. He lifted it, not gulping, not tentative, just raising it like a gentleman at high tea might, poised wrist, elbow relaxed, the learned economy of movement. He did it without thinking, and that was the electric part. There are gestures your body keeps when your life changes its name. She watched him, and the plan that had skittered through her bloodstream, show up, stun, leave, shifted almost imperceptibly. Something thin inside her went quiet enough to listen. Saturday, she said, setting her own mug down carefully as if the sound might trigger a trap. They like to start these things on time. We'll need to practice not tripping over each other. We'll need a story, he said, and again the economy of it. No flourish, just the simplest line between 2 points. She almost told him the story she'd already drafted, the urban reforestation consultant and the volunteer who saved kittens. It would work. More than that, it would hide. But she stopped, for reasons she could not yet articulate. Maybe because he had asked for the one rule that mattered to him. Maybe because the gold-edged invitation on her table had been the ugliest kind of story, one written about her without her consent. We can improvise, she said quietly. He nodded, and his eyes, working blue, not asking for praise, held hers without pressure. He took another sip, set the mug down with that soft porcelain click that feels like an ending or a beginning depending on the day. So, he said, and the corner of his mouth tugged upward, a small mischief released into the room. What color's the tie? The bathroom mirror had never seen this much ceremony. Usually it caught Lucia in a rush. A hasty bun before a job interview, mascara done one-eyed on the bus, a face rehearsing confidence it didn't feel. But tonight the tiny room had been converted into a makeshift salon, steam curling against the chipped tiles as Dylan sat in her rickety chair with a towel draped over his shoulders, waiting with a patience that made her nervous. Lucia stood behind him, scissors in one hand, borrowed barber kit in the other, her hair pulled back like a general preparing troops. If you flinch, I'll shave your eyebrow off, she warned. He didn't flinch. If you give me an uneven cut, I'll sue. Her laugh was too sharp, but it came anyway. You'd need money for that. Maybe I'm secretly loaded, he said without looking at her, as though tossing a pebble into a deep pond just to watch the ripples. Her hands froze. For 1 second, the bathroom was too small, the walls too close. Then she shook it off and trimmed the first line along his temple. You? Loaded? You look like you haven't seen a pillow in months. Appearances can be deceiving. He said it lightly, but the words hung in the air like an echo too loud for the space. She snorted, brushing loose strands from his shoulder. Well, mine isn't. What you see is what you get. Good, he said, eyes still on the mirror. It makes improvisation easier. Improvisation. The word stuck. He spoke like someone used to strategy, not survival. When the haircut was done, the man staring back from the mirror wasn't the one she'd found on the pavement. The beard was neat, jawline cut sharp again, hair swept back to reveal a face that seemed too sure of itself for someone who had spent the last night on her couch. He looked expensive, even in her cousin's hand-me-down shirt. Wow, she whispered, then cursed herself for letting it out loud. Dylan caught her gaze in the mirror. I'll take that as a passing grade. Don't get cocky, you still smell like the street. She shoved cologne samples at him too quickly. Minutes later, when he emerged in fitted dark jeans and the crisp shirt she'd ironed with trembling hands, Lucia's stomach dipped in a way she hated. This wasn't supposed to be attraction. This was supposed to be a weapon, a date to throw in Adrien's smug face. "You'll do," she muttered, though her voice betrayed more. Dylan smirked, rolling the cuffs like he'd been born doing it. "So, boss, what's my backstory? Spy? Brain surgeon? Astronaut?" She crossed her arms, forcing her pulse to slow. "You're an international sustainability consultant. Renewable energy. We met at a community eve. You were impressed by my volunteer work, and it was love at first sight." "That's very specific," he said, eyes glittering. "You've been rehearsing." "Since last night," she admitted. He walked across her tiny living room, pacing like a man preparing for a courtroom. "Tell me, what's our song? Where was our first trip? Do I have a dog or a cat allergy?" The questions jabbed at her, teasing, but his tone was oddly professional. Too professional. Like a man who had trained for high-stakes performances before. "Stick to the basics," she snapped. "No need for flourishes." But something unsettled her. The way he carried himself now, the easy stride, the controlled gestures. This wasn't learned on the street. This wasn't survival instinct. This was practice, the kind of polish you only got from rooms filled with men in suits and the sharp edge of expectation. Suspicion slid through her chest like ice. Who exactly had she invited into her home? That night, she heard him moving in the kitchen while she pretended to sleep. The steady scrape of cutlery, the measured pour of water, the faint hum of a man not afraid of silence. She almost got up to confront him, but stopped herself. She remembered his one rule, no questions about my past. Still, the question burned in her throat. By morning, she was determined to test him. She set 2 mugs on the table. "Practice time," she said. "Look at me like you're in love." Dylan obeyed, but it wasn't performance. His eyes locked on hers with such intensity her chest warmed against her will. "Too much," she whispered, looking away. "Or not enough," he countered softly. Her hands trembled on the mug, and she hated that he noticed. She had wanted a shield, not this slow unraveling, and yet she couldn't back out now. Saturday loomed like a cliff, and Dylan was the rope she had chosen. Frayed, mysterious, but the only one she had. He took a long sip of coffee, leaned back, and with the composure of a man who had never been uncertain in his life asked, "So, what color's the tie?" Bella Vista Hall glowed like a cathedral for the rich. Chandeliers spilled light onto marble floors, and the air itself seemed perfumed with money. Outside, expensive cars lined the entrance like an exhibition. Lucia stood frozen at the edge of the grand staircase, the emerald green dress hugging her ribs too tightly, her pulse hammering in her throat. Beside her, Dylan adjusted the cuffs of his navy blue shirt as though he'd been attending galas his entire life. No nervous glance, no stiff posture. He radiated calm, even grace. He reached down and took her hand without asking, his palm steady, warm. "Breathe," he murmured. "You belong here." She forced a laugh. "Sure, with my borrowed dress and $2 lipstick." He leaned close enough for her to feel the brush of his breath. "Trust me, tonight, you'll be the only one they'll notice." The words hit her harder than champagne bubbles. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to walk into that hall like a woman unbothered by ghosts. But the name scrawled on the invitation had clawed at her for days. Adrien, the man who had sworn she was his future, only to become Rebecca's groom 3 months later. The host ushered them in, eyes flicking over Dylan with a flicker of surprise, as if trying to place him. Dylan gave his name with a polite nod, voice smooth, confident. Lucia almost stumbled. He said it the way men of status said their names, like the sound itself was currency. Then the voice she dreaded most cut through the music. "Lucia?" Adrien stood across the room in a suit tailored to arrogance, his hair slicked back like he thought he belonged on a magazine cover. His eyes darted to Dylan, assessing, then narrowing. "Didn't expect to see you here." Lucia's lips curled into a smile so sharp it hurt. "The invite said I was welcome, and I never miss a chance to celebrate true love." Dylan extended his hand, calm as stone. "Dylan, Lucia's partner." Adrien hesitated before shaking it, jaw tightening. "Partner," he repeated as if the word burned. "Yes," Dylan replied, eyes flicking briefly to Lucia with a look so convincing it sent a tremor through her. "We met at a sustainability event. Couldn't take my eyes off her." Lucia's pride surged. For the first time since opening that cursed invitation, she wasn't the one flinching. Adrien was. Rebecca floated toward them then, a shimmering storm in white silk. Her smile was wide, but her eyes gleamed with triumph. "Lucia, so glad you came. And who is this?" Lucia's arm tightened around Dylan's. "This is Dylan, my boyfriend." Rebecca's gaze swept over him slowly, too slowly. When Dylan gave a polite nod, Rebecca's smile faltered. For one beat, her expression cracked into unease, like she'd seen his face before. But she recovered fast. "How lovely. Where are you from?" "Norway," Dylan replied without missing a breath. "Father was a diplomat. I grew up here. I prefer a simpler life, though." Rebecca blinked, thrown off balance. The answer rolled off his tongue too easily, too practiced. She excused herself quickly, though her eyes lingered. Lucia bit her lip to keep from laughing. "Norway?" she whispered once Rebecca was gone. "It was either that or say I lived under the bridge," he said with a grin. For a moment, the game felt almost fun, until the speeches began. Adrien took the stage, glass in hand, already flushed from champagne. "Friends, family, thank you for being here. Tonight we celebrate not just love, but second chances." His eyes found Lucia across the room. "And I want to thank a special guest, Lucia Mendoza, a wonderful woman, someone I once cared for. It's good to see you've moved on, with a Norwegian no less." Laughter rippled through the crowd like knives. Lucia's stomach dropped. She rose, excused herself, and stumbled into the garden outside. The night air hit her like ice. Her chest burned, fury and humiliation tangling inside her. Footsteps followed. Dylan's voice was low, steady. "You handled it like a queen," she laughed bitterly. "I feel like a clown in a borrowed dress." He stepped closer, his eyes soft, unshaken. Sometimes the crown feels heavy before it fits. Her anger loosened, giving way to confusion. Who was this man, who carried himself like he was untouchable? Why did he seem so trained for this world? Before she could ask, another voice sliced the silence. "I know you." A woman stepped out from the shadows of the garden, heels clicking against the stones. She wore a blazer sharp enough to cut glass, hair pinned back, eyes locked on Dylan. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Lucia's heart hammered. Dylan didn't flinch. "You're mistaken." But the woman stepped closer. "Navaro Tech, 2 years ago. You came through the front desk often. Different clothes, same eyes. Dylan Navaro." Lucia's breath caught. Navaro. The tech empire she'd only ever read about in headlines. Dylan's jaw tightened, but his tone stayed calm. "You're interrupting a private moment." The woman's gaze lingered on him like a warning. "Not everyone has forgotten who you are." She turned, disappearing into the shadows. Lucia's mind raced, words tripping over each other. "Dylan Navaro, as in..." He turned to her, eyes sharp now. "Don't. Not here." Her chest heaved. "You told me not to ask about your past, but it just walked up in high heels and called you out." Silence stretched between them, taut as wire. Finally, Dylan exhaled. "You wanted the truth? Fine. I used to have everything, money, power, the headlines. I was heir to Navaro Tech, until it all collapsed. Betrayal, scandal, my board push. Eat me out, and I walked away, or tried to." His gaze held hers, stripped bare. "Now I'm here, pretending to be your date, because for once I just wanted to be..." "Dylan." Lucia's breath shook. "So, I picked up a billionaire off the street." His smile was bitter. "Ex-billionaire. There's a difference." Before she could answer, music swelled inside the hall, and Adrien's voice rang out again. "Let's toast!" Lucia stared at Dylan, the weight of 1,000 new questions pressing down on her. The man she thought she'd rescued wasn't broken at all. He was dangerous. He was powerful. And she was in far deeper than she'd ever planned. Inside, laughter roared. But outside, in the shadows of Bella Vista Hall, the real story had only just begun. The wedding hall pulsed with music and champagne chatter, but for Lucia, every sound felt sharpened, every laugh aimed like an arrow. When she walked back inside with Dylan at her side, she could already feel the whispers chasing them like smoke. People weren't just curious anymore. They were suspicious. She caught a man in a tux leaning toward his wife, lips moving fast, eyes flicking toward Dylan. Another woman, hand glittering with diamonds, covered her mouth as she muttered to her neighbor. It wasn't just about her being Adrien's ex. It was about him, about Dylan. "Smile," Dylan whispered, his hand still resting lightly on hers, warm and grounding. "The trick is to never let them smell fear." She forced a smile, though her stomach twisted. "Easy for you to say. You're used to whatever this is." His jaw flexed, but he didn't answer. Instead, he guided her back toward their table, his movements smooth, deliberate, like a man who'd played this part before. And maybe that was the problem. He wasn't just pretending. Dinner blurred. Dylan knew which fork to use, when to nod at the right joke, how to slide seamlessly into a conversation about investments. Lucia watched in disbelief as he spoke casually with two of Adrien's business friends about renewable energy projects. His voice carried authority, confidence, not a single stammer, not a trace of the man she'd picked up barefoot outside a restaurant. "Who are you, really?" She didn't have time to ask. A groomsman stumbled past their table, drunk and grinning, glass of wine sloshing dangerously. He bumped into Dylan, spilling red down the front of his crisp shirt. "Perfect," Dylan muttered under his breath, grabbing a napkin. "Come on," Lucia said quickly, tugging his sleeve. "Bathroom, before it sets." They slipped down a side corridor, the noise of the party muffled behind the heavy doors. In the private washroom, Dylan peeled off his jacket and began unbuttoning his shirt. Lucia reached for a towel, but then froze. A scar, long, thin, pale against his skin, carved just below his left shoulder. Her hand hovered in the air. "What's that from?" "Nothing," he said too quickly, tugging the fabric to cover it. "Dylan." He turned sharply, eyes dark, guarded. "It's just a scar. Everyone has them. But not everyone hides them like a state secret." For a flicker of a second, something raw flashed across his face. Fear, pain, vulnerability. Then it vanished, shuttered behind his calm mask. "Do you ever get tired of pretending?" she asked quietly. He met her gaze. "Every day." The air between them tightened. She could feel the hum of danger, the weight of unspoken truths pressing in. Then, before either of them could say more, the door swung open. Rebecca. She stood there, flawless as ever, but her eyes weren't smiling. They zeroed in on Dylan, on his unbuttoned shirt, on the scar. "Well," she said smoothly, voice dripping with venom, "it's C. Miss, your Norwegian diplomat has more layers than I thought." Lucia stiffened. "What do you want, Rebecca?" Rebecca ignored her, stepping closer to Dylan. "You know, you look familiar. I could swear I've seen your face before, but not in cheap clothes." Her eyes narrowed. "More like in headlines." Dylan's jaw tightened. "You're mistaken." But Rebecca's smile sharpened. "Maybe, or maybe I just uncovered the most delicious piece of gossip this wedding could ever hope for." She leaned in, her perfume heavy, intoxicating. "Imagine the press. The ex shows up with a billionaire in disguise. It would almost make me jealous if it weren't so pathetic." Lucia snapped. "Back off, Rebecca." Rebecca turned her head slowly, lips curling. "Careful, Lucia. You always were good at choosing broken toys, but this one comes with knives hidden in the velvet." Then she turned on her heel and vanished, heels clicking like gunshots down the hall. Lucia's chest heaved. She looked at Dylan, panic rising. "She's going to tell people. She won't," Dylan cut in, but there was no conviction in his voice. "You don't know that." He exhaled, pressing his palm against the sink. "You're right, I don't. And that's the problem." When they returned to the hall, it was worse. Heads turned, whispers swelled louder now, electric, insistent. Someone at the bar snapped a photo on their phone. Another guest leaned in too close, asking Dylan where he was really from. Lucia's pulse raced. This wasn't just about humiliating Adrien anymore. This was spiraling into something dangerous, something public. And then, like the final match dropped into dry tinder, her phone buzzed in her clutch, a news alert. She pulled it out, and her blood ran cold. Former Navaro Tech CEO Dylan Navaro spotted at private wedding event. Photo leaks spark frenzy after 2-year disappearance. The blurry picture on the screen was unmistakable. Dylan standing beside her in the garden, eyes calm, hand in his pocket. Lucia's knees went weak. She shoved the phone into Dylan's hand. His expression hardened as he read, but he didn't look surprised. "They've found me," he said softly. Her voice cracked. "What does this mean?" "It means," he replied, eyes lifting to meet hers with a weight she could barely hold, "that everything's about to change, for both of us." At that moment, the chandeliers above seemed to hum louder, the crowd's laughter sharper, the night itself poised on the edge of something irreversible. Lucia's plan had started as a petty act of pride. Now, she stood in the center of a storm far larger than anything she'd imagined. And beside her was a man who wasn't just a stranger off the street. He was a ghost returned from exile. A man hunted, a man with enemies. And she, foolish, stubborn, desperate for dignity, was suddenly his only alibi. The night after Bella Vista Hall refused to leave Lucia alone. She carried its perfume, its whispers, its laughter clinging to her skin like smoke. Even after scrubbing the makeup from her face, After peeling herself out of the emerald dress and curling on her couch in a sweatshirt too big to feel anything but safe, she could still hear Adrien's mocking toast, Rebecca's venom, the gasp of the crowd when Dylan's name bled into rumor, and worse, the silence that followed. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Notifications stacked one over another until the screen froze. She turned it off, but the world had already turned on her. Gossip sites had pulled her name from the wedding registry. Photos of her, of Dylan, of their clasped hands were already online, captioned with speculation too sharp to breathe through. Lucia Mendoza, one headline sneered, from jilted ex to CEO's secret flame? She tossed the phone into the synth home, hands trembling. A knock at the door, sharp, too sharp. She froze, pulse racing. It wasn't Adrien, it wasn't her mother. She didn't know who it was, and in that moment she wasn't sure she wanted to. But when she opened it, Dylan stood there, shirt changed, eyes tired, posture loose like he'd been running from shadows. In his hand was an envelope. "I shouldn't be here," he said quietly, leaning against the frame. "But I had to." Lucia folded her arms, defenses locking into place. "To tell me more half-truths? No, to thank you, for reminding me that I can still be more than a scandal." Her laugh was brittle, funny, because now I'm the scandal. He flinched at that, then held out the envelope. "Read this when you're ready. It's everything." She stared at it, heavy in her palm, words scratching at the paper like they wanted out, but she didn't open it, not yet. Instead, she said the words she didn't mean but needed. "You should go." For once, he didn't argue. He just looked at her, eyes weighted with something like apology, something like regret, and then he left, the sound of the door closing loud enough to echo in her chest. Lucia didn't sleep. She sat at the table with the envelope staring back at her like a dare, like the wedding invitation had days earlier. Finally, at dawn, she tore it open. The handwriting was firm, steady. "Lucia, when I walked away from Navaro Tech, from the billions, from the name, I thought I was erasing a story. But really, I was erasing myself. I wanted to be invisible. To disappear. To breathe without cameras on me, without lawyers breathing down my neck, without betrayal at every turn. Then you found me. You laughed at me. You asked me to be part of your insane plan. And for the first time in years, I wasn't a ghost. I was Dylan. Just Dylan. Everything I felt with you was real, even if everything I told you wasn't. If you can believe. That I'll be waiting. At the bridge." Her hands shook as she folded it back. She hated that her heart leapt at his words, hated that she wasn't strong enough to toss it in the trash with the empty chocolate wrappers and pizza flyers. By afternoon, the media storm had grown teeth. Someone from a local news station called, asking if she wanted to share her side. A stranger slipped a note under her door. How much did he pay you to hide him? Online, comments flooded her old posts, some calling her a gold digger, others calling her a traitor. By evening, another knock came. She opened the door, but this time it wasn't Dylan. Two men in suits stood there, slick hair, eyes hidden behind shades despite the dim hallway. One held a briefcase. The other flashed a card too quickly for her to read. "Miss Mendoza," the taller one said smoothly, "we need to discuss Dylan Navaro." Her gut twisted. "He isn't here." "We know. We're here for you." She tried to slam the door, but the shorter one blocked it with his foot. "Don't be afraid. We're not police. We represent interests. People who believe Mr. Navaro still owes them answers and money." "I don't know anything," she snapped, voice shaking. The taller man leaned in, his cologne sharp, suffocating. "Then make sure you don't learn. Curiosity has a way of killing more than cats." They pulled back, leaving a business card on her table as they walked away. No name, no number. Just an embossed symbol, a crown fractured down the middle. Lucia slammed the lock shut and slid down the door, knees to her chest, breath shallow. This wasn't just gossip anymore. This was danger. She clutched Dylan's letter to her chest, whispering through tears, "What have you dragged me into?" And yet, beneath the fear, beneath the humiliation, another truth burned through. She wanted to see him again. Not because of the mystery, not because of the billionaire headlines, but because when he looked at her, she felt like someone worth protecting, worth seeing. But now, seeing him might mean walking straight into the fire. The bridge rose out of the mist like something pulled from an old memory, half lit by the flicker of street lamps. Its concrete bones stretched over the black water, carrying the weight of cars above and secrets below. Lucia's breath fogged the night air as she approached, clutching Dylan's letter in her coat pocket as if it were proof she hadn't gone mad. She hadn't wanted to come. Every part of her screamed that this was reckless, stupid, dangerous. But another part, The one that had laughed at Dylan's dry jokes, the one that had seen his scar and wanted to trace it with more than questions, had dragged her here anyway. And then she saw him. Dylan was sitting on the edge of the bridge railing, dark jacket drawn tight against the wind, eyes fixed on the horizon. He looked like a man at the end of the world, calm in a way that terrified her. "You came," he said without turning. "I haven't forgiven you," she shot back, her voice trembling from more than the cold. "Fair enough." She stepped closer, the water below roaring against the stone. "But I need to understand, all of it. Because right now, my life's upside down. Reporters are camped outside my building, strangers are calling me a criminal, and two men in suits with no names threaten me. You owe me more than half-truths, Dylan." At that, he turned. His eyes weren't calm anymore. They were storm dark, heavy with things unsaid. "Those men, the ones with the fractured crown symbol?" Her breath caught. "You know them?" "They're not journalists. They're the people who set me up. The boardroom wolves who carved up Navaro Tech while putting my name in the fire. I walked away, but they didn't. They've been waiting for me to surface, and now," he gestured toward the shadows of the bridge where a black sedan idled, lights off, windows tinted. "They think I'm ready to be hunted again." Lucia's heart pounded. "So I'm just collateral, the stupid girl who brought the ghost of Navaro Tech back to life." "No." He stood moving toward her with an intensity that made her stumble back. "You're the reason I remembered I still have a life, that I'm not just a headline. I was ready to vanish forever, and then you—" His voice cracked, uncharacteristically raw. "You made me laugh. You made me want." The confession cut through her anger, but before she could respond, the sedan doors opened. 3 figures stepped out, men in suits, silent, deliberate, moving like a tide of inevitability. Dylan pulled her behind him, body tense, voice low. "Stay close." One of the men called out, "Mr. Navaro, time to stop hiding. You've played beggar long enough." Lucia's hand gripped Dylan's sleeve. "What do they want from you?" "They want me silent. They want the last Navaro name to vanish, so no one asks how they gutted the company." His jaw tightened. "And if they can't have my silence, they'll take my blood." The men advanced, footsteps echoing against the concrete. Dylan's arm tightened around her. "Run," he whispered. "No," she shot back. "Not this time." The nearest man sneered. "Chivalry's touching but unnecessary. We don't need her, just you." Lucia surprised herself. She stepped out from behind Dylan, chin high, voice sharp with fury. "Funny, because without me you wouldn't even know where he was. I found him when no one else could, and if you think I'm going to let you drag him back into the shadows." "Lucia," Dylan hissed, panic flashing in his eyes. But the men paused, uncertain. Her defiance cracked their rhythm, bought them a heartbeat of silence. And in that silence, a second car pulled up. A woman stepped out. Sharp blazer, hair pinned tight, heels striking like gunshots. The same woman from the garden, Helena. Only this time, her voice wasn't accusatory. It was commanding. "That's enough." The men stiffened, exchanging wary glances. Helena's eyes locked on Dylan. "You're still an idiot for showing your face here, but you're mine to protect, not theirs to bury." She turned to the men, flashing a badge none of them expected. Government seal, stamped with authority. "Step back. This man is under my jurisdiction now." For the first time, Dylan looked shaken. "You're—" "Yes," she snapped. "Not just a legal advisor, an investigator, embedded to watch Navaro Tech's collapse, and you're the missing witness we've been chasing for 2 years." Lucia's knees nearly buckled. "Witness?" Helena's gaze flicked to her, sharp but not unkind. "He didn't just fall, he was pushed, and he saw who did the pushing, which means tonight, if he wants to stop running, he finally has to talk." Dylan's chest heaved. "And if I don't? Then you keep hiding until they catch you in an alley instead of a bridge." Helena's voice softened, just slightly. "You're tired, Dylan. I can see it. Maybe it's time to end this." Lucia's eyes burned as she looked at him. "She's right. Stop carrying this alone." For a moment, Dylan looked between them. Helena's badge, Lucia's trembling hands. Then, with a long exhale, he nodded. The men in suits cursed under their breath, retreating to the sedan, but not without a warning glare. The fractured crown gleamed once more before the car disappeared into the night. Silence fell over the bridge, heavy and unreal. Lucia turned to Dylan, heart pounding. "So what happens now?" He stepped closer, brushing his fingers against hers, tentative, almost reverent. "Now I stop being a ghost, and maybe we start being something real." Tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them. "You're impossible."